You're listening to Season 5 of No Silver Spoons, hosted by Sarah Beth Herman. This season is a celebration of growth, resilience, and the kind of success that is built, not handed out. Sarah Beth is a 5-time CEO, a leader who teaches others how to scale, move through self-doubt, and use the power of neuroplasticity to change their lives and their businesses. She created No Silver Spoons to remind you that no one rises alone. Every episode in this season brings real stories, honest lessons, and the journey behind becoming the kind of entrepreneur who refuses to quit. You will also notice that many episodes come in series, so when you find one that speaks to you, stay with it. A lot of these episodes also include digital downloads that help you keep growing, and you can find those in the show notes. Welcome to Season 5. There is so much to celebrate. So without any further ado, here's your host, Sarah Beth Herman.
Hey everyone, welcome back to No Silver Spoons. I'm Sarah Beth Herman, and I'm really glad you're here today. Last week, we kicked off our new series, The Human Side of Leadership. And if you missed that very first episode of this 10-part series, I'd encourage you to go back and listen because it really is the foundation for where we're headed over the next several weeks. One of the things I promised you when we started this series is that I wasn't interested in giving you 10 weeks of leadership cliches or business advice that you've probably heard 100 times before. There are enough podcasts doing just that. What I wanted to do was invite you into the conversations that have genuinely shaped the way that I think and changed the way that I think over the last several years. And I have to tell you, I have had so much fun preparing for today's episode. And not because the research was super interesting, although it definitely was. And not because neuroscience fascinates me to no end, because it absolutely does also. But because this episode forced me to spend time reflecting on myself. There were several moments while I was preparing for today where I had to stop reading and just sit with a thought for a minute. There were places where I realized, Sarah Beth, you've done this before. And it wasn't the Sarah Beth from 10 or 20 years ago. It was me now. There were moments where I caught myself recognizing patterns in my own life that I hadn't really connected before. And I think that even though we listen to podcasts, we attend leadership seminars, we get mentors, we have great leaders, we seek advice and wise wisdom from others. Even though all those things exist, it also exists that we fall back into old patterns, that we forget little tidbits. And sometimes you just need a tiny reminder. Sometimes you just need to read that one line in that one book that reminds you, wait a minute, I don't have to be that person anymore. And even now, as I'm writing this episode, as I'm ready for you to hear some of the wisdom that I've learned, taught, and experienced, I find myself thinking, man, imposter syndrome for a minute, because why am I qualified to teach and talk about any of this if I'm still doing some of these things? I think it's fair. I think it's fair you hear that from me. I think it's fair we talk about it. And I think it's fair that we learn and grow from it. I think one of the reasons I enjoy researching human behavior so much is that every time I start trying to understand other people, I end up understanding myself a little better too. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe you've read a book that felt like someone had been secretly watching your life, or listened to a podcast where halfway through you thought, well, that was a little bit uncomfortable. And not because it was wrong, but because it was maybe perhaps a little too accurate. This episode was that experience for me. The subtitle for this episode is Why Smart People Stay Stuck. And before you decide that this episode isn't about you, I just want you to stay with me for a minute. Because I don't think being stuck always looks dramatic. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it looks productive or even successful. You keep showing up and paying the bills and taking care of patients and taking care of your family and growing your business. You keep checking every box that everyone else expects you to check. And yet something feels like it hasn't moved in a really long time. And maybe it's your leadership. Maybe it's your confidence. Maybe it's a conversation that you've been avoiding or a decision that you've known you needed to make for months. Maybe it's a habit you've promised yourself that you were going to change. And from the outside, everything, it just looks fine. But inside, you know you're standing still. That fascinates me. Because if intelligence were enough, none of us would stay stuck. Think about that. Some of the smartest people I've ever met have remained in situations that they knew weren't healthy. I've watched brilliant dentists and CEOs and CFOs and COOs avoid difficult conversations because they didn't want to disappoint someone. I've watched incredibly successful business owners continue using systems they openly admitted weren't working anymore. I've watched talented employees convince themselves they weren't ready for opportunities that they were more than qualified for. I've watched patients postpone treatment that they knew they needed because next month somehow felt easier than today. Different people, different circumstances, same human pattern, right? And then I had to ask myself the obvious question, why? Because I don't believe smart people stay stuck because they lack information. If information solved everything, then we'd all exercise more, we'd all eat healthier, we'd all communicate better, we'd all save more money, we'd all have difficult conversations the moment we knew we needed to have them. Most of us already know what healthy leadership looks like. We already know what healthy communication looks like. We already know we should sleep more, stress less, move our bodies, put our phones down once in a while. Information clearly isn't the problem. So what is? That's the rabbit hole I found myself going down. I started reading more about neuroscience probably 10, 20 years ago. I don't even know. I've just been studying it for so long. I started looking at behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, habit formation, decision-making, and not because I wanted another degree, though I am pursuing one, and not because I wanted to impress anyone. I simply wanted to understand why intelligent, capable, good people sometimes struggle to do the very things they already know would make their lives so much better. And one of the most fascinating things I learned is that your brain has a primary responsibility, and it isn't making you successful. It isn't helping you become wealthy. It isn't helping you become the best leader in your organization. Its first responsibility is survival. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment, asking one question: am I safe? Not, will this make me better? Not, will this help me grow? Simply put, am I safe? Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, one of the leading researchers in neuroscience and the author of How Emotions Are Made, explains that our brains are constantly making predictions based on previous experiences. They aren't simply reacting to what's happening around us in the moment. They're trying to anticipate what comes next by using yesterday's experiences to interpret today. Think about how profound that is. Every difficult conversation you have had, every failure, rejection, success, encouragement, disappointment, your brain stores those experiences and quietly uses them to predict what might happen next, which means when you're standing at the edge of change, your brain isn't just evaluating today's opportunity. It's comparing today's opportunity to every similar experience you've had. No wonder change feels uncomfortable. No wonder growth feels so stinking risky. No wonder so many intelligent people stay exactly where they are, even when they desperately want something different. Their brain isn't trying to sabotage them. It's trying to protect them. And understanding that changed the way I look at myself. Because instead of asking, what is wrong with me? I started asking, what is my brain trying to protect me from? And those are two completely different questions. And I think that they are the beginning of a much healthier conversation. The next thing that I kept asking myself while preparing for this very episode was, okay, Sarah Beth, if all of that is true, then what? Because I never want to leave you with just information. We can get information from anywhere. Because I just never want to leave you with only information. I want to leave you with something you can actually use. If our brains are designed to protect us, then how do we continue growing? The answer isn't to force yourself into becoming fearless. That's actually not realistic at all. In fact, I don't think the goal has ever been fearlessness. I think the goal is learning how to move while fear is still sitting in the passenger seat. And I don't know the fear actually ever completely goes away. I know it hasn't for me. I've built companies while being afraid. I've hired people while wondering if I was making the right decision. I have had difficult conversations with my stomach tied in knots. I've had to pray before phone calls. I've launched things that nobody asked me to launch and launched even more things that nobody ever took part in. I've closed doors that I wasn't sure I should close. I've started over I've failed, I've succeeded, I've done all of those things. And fear, it usually came along for the ride. It just wasn't driving anymore. And that was the difference for me. But sometimes we spend so much energy trying to eliminate fear that we never actually move. And when I say that, I want you to think about all the times that you say, okay, as soon as I get this done, then I'll do that. Or as soon as this happens, then that will happen. Or I really am going to quit this job and start my own business, and this is how I'm going to do it. Or if you've ever thought to yourself, man, I want to be friends with that person because they're so successful and they'll probably tell me all their secrets and then I'll be successful. All of those scenarios are fear. Sometimes we spend so much energy trying to eliminate fear that we never actually move. But growth has never required the absence of fear. Growth requires movement, one small step, then another, and then another. In neuroscience, it actually supports this. One of the concepts that completely fascinated me is neuroplasticity. And I've talked about this so many times on this podcast. But for years, scientists believed that the brain stopped changing after childhood. And now we know that isn't true. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself. Every conversation, every habit, every decision, every new experience, you're literally strengthening certain neural pathways while allowing others to weaken. And think about how encouraging that is. You're not permanently wired to stay where you are. Your brain changes because you practice something different. Not once, but repeatedly, and that changes the conversation. Instead of asking, can I change? The question becomes, what am I repeatedly practicing? Because whatever we practice, we become better at it. If I practice avoidance, I become really, really good at avoiding. If I practice difficult conversations, eventually they become a little less difficult. If I practice courage, my confidence slowly catches up. Not overnight, but gradually it will. James Clear, he wrote one of my absolutely favorite books. It's called Atomic Habits. And in that book, he writes that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you believe yourself to be. I've thought about that sentence a lot because I think many of us wait until we feel like a confident leader before we start acting like a confident leader. And maybe confidence isn't the prerequisite. Maybe confidence is the byproduct. Maybe confidence comes after hundreds of tiny decisions where we choose to become the person that we're hoping to become. To me, that's encouraging because it means nobody has to change their entire life tomorrow. Maybe your next step is one conversation, one phone call, one apology, one boundary, one application, one decision that you've been putting off. And that's how change begins. Not dramatically, but consistently. Before we wrap up this episode, you know what time it is. It's time for my That's Good moment. This has become one of my favorite parts of every episode because it gives us a chance to slow down before we jump back into our busy lives. If there's one thing I hope you remember from today, it's this. Your brain is not broken. It isn't working against you. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to protect you. The challenge is that what feels safe isn't always what helps us grow. And that's really good. The second thing I'd like to leave you with is this. Don't confuse understanding yourself with excusing yourself. There's a difference there. Learning about neuroscience isn't permission to stay where you are. It's permission to stop criticizing yourself long enough to understand why change feels so difficult. Understanding creates compassion, and then compassion creates space for growth. And finally, I hope this week that you notice one place where you've been telling yourself, I'll do that someday. I'll do that when blank happens. And then ask yourself one question. What would one small step look like today? Not next year, not when life calms down, not when someone else teaches you their magic potion or does enough that they can bring you along for the ride, but today. Because lasting change rarely begins with giant leaps. It usually begins one quiet decision that nobody ever sees. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. I never take for granted that you chose to press play when there are thousands of other podcasts you could be listening to. It means more to me than you probably realize. And if this episode made you think, I'd love for you to share it with someone that has been feeling stuck lately. Not because I think I have all the answers, but because maybe It starts a conversation that they needed to have. And next week, we're going to continue the human side of leadership by looking at something every leader eventually faces. And that's why great employees leave. And I think what you'll discover is that people rarely leave for the reasons we assume they do. Until then, stay curious, pay attention to patterns, keep asking better questions. I'm Sarah Beth Herman. Thank you for joining me for another episode of No Silver Spoons. I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you for joining today's episode of No Silver Spoons with your host, Sarah Beth Herman. If this conversation gave you something real to take into your life or your work, stay connected by following the show, rating, and subscribing. You can learn more about Sarah Beth's work in the dental industry at dentistrysupport.com, where she leads a global virtual support company that has changed the way practices run their operations. You can also connect with her on her Instagram at mentor.sbh to follow her leadership teachings, her story, and the behind the scenes of a 5-time CEO who has dedicated nearly 25 years to helping teams grow. Many episodes on this season come with great digital downloads that you can find in the show notes. And if you feel inspired to be a guest or share your own journey, there's a link there as well. Thank you for being part of Season 5. Your growth matters here.